Hello everyone, in this PowerPoint presentation, we're going to be talking specifically about the male reproductive tract. In the previous learning outcome, we learned that the testes will produce physically mature spermatozoa that are not yet capable of successful fertilization, basically because they're not yet motile, meaning that they can't move yet, they can't relocate by themselves. Therefore, the other regions of the male reproductive system are going to be concerned with the functional maturation, the nourishment, the storage, and the transport of the spermatozoa. And this will be the function of the male reproductive tract as well, which includes the epididymis, the ductus deferens, the ejaculatory duct, and the urethra. More specifically, the spongy urethra and the membranous urethra. So let's get started on the next slide talking about the epididymis. When we were covering the testes in the previous learning outcome, we saw that late in their development, the spermatozoa will become detached from the nerve cells and they are going to be free within the lumen of the seminiferous tubule. However, although they have most of the physical characteristics of a mature sperm cell, they are still functionally immature and they are actually incapable of coordinated locomotion and therefore fertilization. Now, the fluid currents then transport the spermatozoa along the straight tubule, which we already talked about. From the straight tubule, it goes into the ready testes and then into the epididymis through the efferent ductules. Now, as we can see, the epididymis lies along the posterior superior border of the testes. It has a firm texture and it can actually be felt through the skin of the scrotum. Now, the epididymis consists of a tubule almost 7 meters long, which is 23 feet long, and it's going to be coiled and twisted so as to take up very little space. The epididymis has a head, a body, and a tail, and the superior head receives the spermatozoa via the efferent ductules, as we already talked about, and this will be coming from the mediastinum of the testes. The body begins distal to the last efferent duct and it extends inferiorly along the posterior margin of the testes. So if we can follow it coming down right over here, and near the inferior border of the testes, the number of convolutions will decrease. As we notice, the tail is a little bit more smooth, and this will mark the start of the tail of the epididymis. Then the tail sort of reverses the direction and it starts to ascend, running behind over here, and it will become the ductus deferens. Now, the tail of the epididymis is one of the main regions involved with the sperm storage. Now, both the head and the body of the epididymis will be lined by a pseudostratified columnar epithelium with a very long stereocilia. There are several different types of epididymal epithelial cells, and these are the principal cells, basal cells, clear cells, apical cells, and halo cells. The ones that I need you to know are the principal cells, which are the most abundant cells in highly active secretory and absorptive cells that are responsible for producing much of the unusual protein composition of the epididymal lumen, as well as playing additional roles in modulating the luminal pH. So basically, they're going to be creating the ideal environment for the sperm to be able to survive. And the stereocilia, they will aid in the principal cell's role of the absorption of the luminal fluids by increasing the surface area of the principal cells. And along with the afferent ducts, the epididymis will absorb over 90% of the fluid from the seminiferous tubules. The epididymis will have three major functions. It monitors and adjusts the composition of the fluid that's produced by the seminiferous tubules, and it will also play a very important role in the reabsorption of this fluid with the help of the stereocilia that is present, as we have seen, in the pseudostratified columnar epithelial lining. It will also act as this recycling center for damaged spermatozoa, so cellular debris and damaged spermatozoa are going to be absorbed, and the products of the enzymatic breakdown are going to be released into the surrounding interstitial fluids for absorption into the epididymal circulation. And third, that it stores spermatozoa and it facilitates their functional maturation. So it takes about 2 weeks for a spermatozoon to pass through the epididymis, and during this period, it completes its functional maturation in a very protected environment. Although the spermatozoa leaving the epididymis are mature, they remain immobile. To become active, motile, and fully functional, the spermatozoa, they must undergo what we refer to as capacitation. And this process normally occurs in 2 steps. First, the spermatozoa will become motile when it's mixed with secretions of the seminal glands. And second, they become capable of successful fertilization when, upon exposure to the conditions inside of the female reproductive tract, the permeability of the sperm plasmalemma changes. And while the spermatozoa remain in the male reproductive tract, there's going to be a secretory product of the epididymis that prevents the premature capacitation. Therefore, the transport along the epididymis involves some combination of the fluid movement and peristaltic contractions of the smooth muscle. The spermatozoa eventually will leave the tail of the epididymis, and then it will enter the next compartment, which is the ductus deferens. Therefore, the ductus deferens, which can also be called vas deferens, begins at the end of the tail of the epididymis, and it will ascend into the abdominal pelvic cavity through what we call the inguinal canal as part of the spermatic cord, which we have already seen. And inside the abdominal cavity, the ductus deferens will pass posteriorly, curving inferiorly along the lateral surface of the urinary bladder, as we can see right over here. So this is the urinary bladder, and we can see how it curves on the lateral surface of the urinary bladder. And then it will run towards the superior and posterior margin of the prostate gland, which we can see right over here. And just before it reaches the prostate gland, the ductus deferens becomes enlarged, as we can see right over here from this image, and this expanded portion is known as the ampulla. So this would be the testes. Here is the epididymis, the ductus deferens, ending at the ampulla. In addition to transporting the sperm, the ductus deferens can store spermatozoa for several months as well. And during this time, their spermatozoa remain in a state of suspended animation with low metabolic rates, just waiting for its chance to be ejaculated. Now, the junction of each ampulla with the base of the seminal gland, which is this gland right over here, will mark the start of the ejaculatory duct. And this is going to be relatively short, so it's a short passageway that will penetrate the muscular wall of the prostate gland, and it will empty into the urethra near the ejaculatory duct from the other side. So because we have 2 ductus deferens and 2 seminal glands, we will have 2 ampullas of the ductus deferens. They will have 2 ejaculatory ducts. So on this image here in the middle, we can see the ductus deferens running lateral and superior to the urinary bladder. This would be the prostate. And inside the prostate, these two little holes over here are the holes or the openings for the ejaculatory ducts that are bringing the contents from the seminal gland and the ductus deferens that will come together right over here in the prostate. More specifically, in the urethra or the prostatic urethra of the prostate. Now we know that the male urethra is very long. It's the part that will come out of the urinary bladder, and depending on where it's passing through, it will receive specific names. So the part that's passing through the prostate is called the prostatic urethra. The part that's passing through this muscle over here, which is called the urogenital diaphragm, is called the membranous urethra. And the part that's passing through the penis itself, it's called the spongy urethra. Now, some authors, they don't consider the prostatic urethra as part of the male reproductive tract, because when the ejaculatory duct empties into the prostate, it's already at the base of the prostate. Therefore, the ejaculatory duct already empties at the end of the prostatic urethra. Therefore, most authors consider the membranous urethra and the spongy urethra as part of the male reproductive tract, because this is where the semen, which is now called the semen, and we will see this why moving forward, but this is where the semen will be passing through once it leaves the ejaculatory duct, as it will come from the ejaculatory duct into the membranous urethra and then into the spongy urethra and then leave the body. Now, the membranous urethra passes through the urogenital diaphragm, which, like the name suggests, is made up of muscles that will act as part of the body wall to support and protect the surrounding organs and hold the genitals and the urinary organs in their correct positions. And this is where the name urogenital comes from, where uro means urinary and genital means genitalia. Therefore, it sits right in between the urinary system and the genitalia or the reproductive system.